Precursor was created to launch the next generation of category-defining companies, the Google of energy, cement, steel, chemicals, minerals, and more. These companies offer solutions that are significantly better than the incumbents. There is no green premium. They're not only meeting the incumbents in price, quality, and sustainability, they are significantly better. This drastically better solution forces incumbents to innovate at speed and scale, like Tesla did with electrification of transportation.
Well, welcome back to the Decarb Connect podcast. We are sponsored by Jano Media, who have been a long-term partner with us, actually, ever since the year we launched back in 2020. We've worked with them very closely on building meaningful content for the industrial decarbonisation ecosystem. And this podcast is just one area that they have worked with us on. So thanks to Jano. And today I'm going to be talking with David Yeh, who is the well-known veteran investor, but more importantly for our purposes today, one of the original founding thinkers of all things FOAK and founder of Precursor, which we'll be hearing a little bit more about later on. So welcome to David. Thank you very much for joining me.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Alex. I love being part of the Decarb Connect community, and thank you for giving us a great platform to preach the gospel of FOAK.
Yes. That's exactly what we're going to do today. Excellent. So some of you listening may well have heard David. Well, you may have heard him in a number of places, but I was thinking specifically of the really excellent Catalyst podcast that I think was back in December 2023 when you recorded that, David. And it was a real, when I found that, I had that recommended by someone I was researching with last year, a great introduction to the complexities of funding really complicated innovations. So I'm going to assume that people either heard it or will go off and find it. So today we're going to focus not so much on all of that, but we're going to look at what's been learned since then. What does FOAK 2.0 look like? What's David learned? What's come up in the market? And really, how do we move on beyond just FOAK as an acronym into FOAK as some meaningful, common project mechanism. Let's look at it that way. So, David, let's kick off then, just in a kind of a more brief recap of what FOAK is really about and what it means to create those bankable early projects. And then from there, we'll dive in a bit more to what's changed perhaps in the last 15 months or so, or what you see changing now.
Wonderful. So it's been over a year before I did probably the first popular podcast on FOAK with the Shale Comment Catalyst. And this was before FOAK became cool. This was before FOAK became part of the climate finance and climate tech mainstream. And since then, we've had over 100 companies reach out to us about FOAK and reach out to me about FOAK. And, we've learned a lot. And, FOAK has come a long way. It's now a thing where there are probably one or two FOAK events at every climate week per day, right? Every startup has FOAK somewhere in their business plan. And, it's a popular acronym to be dropped at on board meetings. So I'm very happy because I think when I first did this podcast and then wrote the popular CTVC series, I thought I was writing to a group of maybe 20 people of climate finance nerds like me. And it's wonderful to know that some of the articles I've written have had 60,000 reads each. And some of the podcasts I've worked on have almost 20,000 listens. And I think it's very, very important that first of kind projects and get built, because you can't build 100 projects if you don't build the first projects, whether that be solar farms, green cement, green steel, or whatnot. Mm. And so anyway, it has been over a year. So I've had some time to reflect. Like, what is really FOAK about? What is the concrete goal of FOAK? And to me, it's actually about developing bankable early projects. So you can develop the first, so then you can go build the 100th. As, in other words, to get the mass deployment. And what does bankable mean in the FOAK context? Because bankable is a term that we're borrowing from the infrastructure world. And to me, it means first, investors, especially conservative infrastructure investors and lenders, want to lend or invest in your project. So think like a big project finance bank like Sumitomo will go to sleep well at night saying they've lent you 30 to $100 million to go build your first of a kind green hydrogen facility. And they say not only will they get the money back, they'll get it back with interest. I think the second thing is customers want to buy from your project, whether it be green steel, green cement. And they feel they, again, can go sleep well at night knowing that you can deliver their electrons, their hydrogens at the price, quantity, and time that you promised. I remember speaking to a head of innovation at a very large petrochemical company. And this is the nicest guy in the world. But when I asked him about working with startups, he says, I don't want to work with any company that's going to go bankrupt in a few years and then bite me in the ass.
Well, as you know that the industrials or the customers of these technologies, that's our bread and butter. And the reason that you and I ever came into contact was because it was industrials saying to us, I'm trying this new kind of interesting tech, but how do I know it's going to exist at scale and deployable in enough places that in the future my targets are going to be met? And that was basically it. They'd got over the initial excitement of something probably going to work for them. And we're now into the worry stage of, okay, but if it works, but we can't scale it, that also doesn't help us.
So for many of the long-term partners, investors, strategics, for many of these folk climate tech companies, I think you need to think about everything in the million of tons, as just used as a very broad metric. You can't be providing them kgs. To that, it's not meaningful to them. And you have to have a clear path, a de-risk path that these strategics and industrialists can say, like, in 5 to 10 years, they can provide meaningful amounts of X, Y, and Z for our company. And this is not only is it cost competitive, it's better than what we're getting from our current incumbent suppliers. A second thing is, like, touching upon suppliers, is that, like, all these projects don't exist in a vacuum. You need to have suppliers who are providing feedstock to a lot of these projects. And again, a lot of these projects, they need balance of plant equipment like a new transformer or a new compressor. And how will these blue chip suppliers choose between providing this equipment to your startup or to a big company like GE or Nextera? They have to be confident that they're going to get paid in their 45 days. And then I think maybe one of the most key things is team. Like, they need to look at the project developers and trust that they will deliver and, be honest, know what they're doing. We have an advisor on our team that has, 30 to 40 years experience in the world of project finance. And we were talking about one startup company in the climate tech space. And his first comment about them as they were approaching their FOAK is that I would not trust them to develop a duplex, let alone a new facility. And I think that is the litmus test. Do you trust this team to go build something? If you don't even trust them to do your kitchen renovation, how can you trust them to build, let's say, $100 million new facility? And then probably the clearest thing that's gone over, very well, is that you can't have this third rail risk, such as binary technology risk. Most of the investors in the folk world, and especially in the mainstream world, cannot digest tech risk. You need to be able to prove this out at the pilot and demo stage before you have serious conversations. And the one thing I can say is that there are a lot of companies who've already done this. This is a very long, hard, arduous journey. in the world of folk, but companies are getting it done. You know, Fervo Energy, which is, a next generation enhanced geothermal company where I'm an investor. Not only did they make their technology bankable, they basically made the entire geothermal industry bankable. And kudos to Tim Latimer for doing that. Because of his work, companies like Sage and Zanskar are now also getting Blackboard escape velocity. And then there's other great companies like Infinium, one of the leading SAF players, for sustainable jet fuel. They have run the table on being bankable. They're backed by the top VCs, have funding from Bill Gates' Breakthrough Catalyst group, have funding the tunes of almost over $1 billion from Brookfield, and have been signing long-term offtakes with some of the biggest airlines. And again, why this happened is their CEO Robert has over 20 years experience, and when investors and strategists look at him, I think they say, and this is what I got from a friend who's an investor, he has built things, and just as importantly, he has experience of when things did not work out. And that's the reason we trust him to go build the next generation of sustainable jet fuel plants, whether that be Roadrunner or Pathfinder.
I think that idea of the scars, scars of where things haven't worked out, is a really interesting one. At the event that I met you at last September, TechInvest, I know some of the investors there, some of the tech companies there were a little taken aback by some of the feedback about the need for certain grit, for experience, for people that were used to getting stuff done and getting stuff financed, not just people who knew the tech, people who were excited about technology, people who were passionate about the issue. But that kind of concept of, show us your scars, don't show me your PhD, show me your scars, was I think a bit of a wake-up call to some of those in the room.
And for me, like, as I think about folk management teams and folk project developers, if I had to choose between a candidate who had 150 IQ and a PhD from Caltech but has never developed a project before, versus someone who had 100 IQ but has been developing projects for the last 20 years, for me, the choice is clear who I want to lead my project development. Again, like when people use the words best practices, lessons learned, most often those are based on things that did not go right. And you learned how to make it go, how you learn from things that went wrong and how to make things go right. And that's one of the key things to understand. Like lots of project development and project execution is based on experience. IQ is great, but it's not a substitute for having done it before and have lived and breathed it.
That idea of expertise or experience being, a key driver of bankable projects. What else? What else sits as key, things that you look for, the flags that are going to predict some level of success?
So for me, the second most popular word after folk is the missing middle. Like, what is the missing middle that gets these projects, early infrastructure projects done? And for me, the missing middle is expertise. That is the killer app for developing bankable, de-risked investments in projects that attract capital, that attract suppliers, that attract strategics, and attract customers. And a lot of people say it's capital. Like, is there a folk asset class? I think to me, that's a tough one because obviously you need capital to build and to grow these things. But I don't think there is an asset class for projects that are high in risk and lower in return. And what we need to do to make folk more of a thing is design projects that are low risk, higher return, and projects that can hit their budgets and hit their deadlines. And you solve for this with expertise. And and how you solve this with expertise is you design bankable projects where you have creditworthy offtakes and business models, where you have blue chip strategic partners like an Occidental, where you have infrastructure grade teams of people who have actually built things for 20, 30 years. You have the right EPC, and you have a blended capital stack, especially of, you know, strategics, non-dilutive money that will often make these early projects, which are harder to be banked, to be bankable. And for me, the key thing is that you can't have early project failure in your climate tech startup. I think that is not an option, especially in these days. I think it's actually game over. If your first project doesn't go well, I don't know if you can raise another round, whether it be at the top co or at the project level. And for the one thing I've tried to say, and I think this crystallized a lot at your Great Decarb conference, is that the developer of your FOAK strategy and your projects needs to have that 10,000 hours of experience. I think this 10,000 hours experience gives you these concrete superpowers to make FOAK projects bankable. I mean, I'm very fortunate that, you know, we started Precursor with Paul McDonough. Paul McDonough has been developing power projects for 30, nearly 40 years. You know, he's done over 9 power projects, over $7 billion of capital and gigawatts of power. And many of them were first of a kind. These were first of kind combustion engines from GE, Siemens, Alstom, as well as a first of its kind technology called net power. And like having a guy like Paul on the team is a person who I'm confident like he can build a project schedule in his sleep. He knows what a project finance model really should be, which is an easy to use investment grade. When choosing an EPC, not only does he have a short list of companies he likes to work with, he has a short list of people he likes to work with. He knows about them as individuals. And then like there are certain really amazing things that experience can bring you. Because I think experience and expertise can be a synonym for relationships and credibility, which is key in everything in life, but it's especially key in the world of FOAK. I think he had this one great story where they were building a partnership with an energy major. And just over 2 Cokes, a few breakfast tacos, and knowing his reputation and watching his team work, this company invested $60 million into his project the next week. But again, also this experience also lets you have, as we say, these lessons learned and what not to do. And like we are also like through a lot of Paul and I's work is that we have a lot of strategics reaching out to us saying like, who's the ideal strategic for us to work with? And some of the things that we've told them is like, this strategic you want to work with, one of the largest power developers in the US, we know their reputation. They're going to spend 6 months with you learning everything about your technology, and then it's bye-bye. There will be no MOU, there'll be no check. And in this day and age, 6 months of runway is invaluable.
So as you put, I mean, we're going to talk a little bit more about Precursor towards the end of the conversation. I'm just thinking about what you're saying about Paul in particular. Mm-hmm. As you put this group together, this platform together, what have been the other kind of key types of experiences that you've wanted to bring to it? And again, we'll dive more into the, you know, what you're doing in detail towards the end as that's important. But yeah, tell me a bit about the team. So we have a Paul who knows people, who knows, you know, the planning, who knows the execution. What else has been significant to you? Because I'm sure that's a reflection then of what you're learning, seeing, remembering, relearning, you know, in this time.
So I think we have a lot of growth. I'm very, very fortunate that Precursor has, I like to think, the deepest bench on FOAK. And we have another partner, his name is Dong Kim. He spent over 30 years at the DOE, including the last 15 at the DOE's $400 billion loan program office. The DOE's track record of doing some of the most catalytic projects and like Tesla, essentially starting the US utility solar market, um, are basically is his track record. And he started off as the chief engineer, but more times than not, he's been often the acting executive director. And it's wonderful for a person who understands both the technology as an engineer, but also as a senior executive who's moved $30 billion, helped move $30 billion of capital into a lot of the most catalytic projects in America. So that's one of them. And again, we just had this great team of advisors. I'm very fortunate to have someone like Dave Rogers, who's the former head of project finance at Latham. In his 40 plus year career, I think he's forgotten more about innovative project finance structuring than most people ever learn. I'm very fortunate to have a lot of great entrepreneurs and executives from the climate world. One is Jeff Trukenbrod, who's the ex-CFO of LanzaTech, as well as Kendra Kuhl, who's a co-founder and the ex-CTO of 12. So when people ask us, we're trying to get the TPG 12 $600 million deal or the LanzaTech Brookfield $500 million deal, we have advisors and partners who can say, like, not only do I know the deal, I help negotiate it. So that was how we were very purpose built, in that we wanted to bring together, as a lot of people call us, the Avengers of FOAK. People, not only can they talk FOAK, they've done FOAK. I think what I try to emphasize is that we're veteran practitioners. And I hate to give away my age. Most of us have about 30 years of work experience. And this is not our first rodeo. And what we can say is that we've been on every step of the FOAK journey. And because we've been on every step of the FOAK journey, from being in the lab to doing the demos to building the FOAK to going to mass deployment, as well as expertise in financing, strategic partnerships, government partnerships, development, we can help a lot of our companies at each step. And we really do hope to be long-term partners with all our clients.
So, I mean, clearly having great partners, a great development unit like you guys is one piece of the win, but ultimately you still need a founder and a leadership team that brings strengths with them. So what are you looking for now when you kind of get your inbound inquiry from Cameron Decarb Tech? What are the flags that you're looking for that you're like, okay, there's a green flag or there's a red flag? What jumps out at you about those founding units?
Let's start with some of the green flags. I think the green flags, we want to find companies with high ambition. Like, what we need is companies who are really trying to be the next generation of Teslas, that they want to build a landmark company that will potentially be, the top company in their sector, or I hate to use disrupt their sector, like Tesla did for transportation, right? I think the second thing is, I think one thing I've really learned over the last year or so is that it's not good enough to say we can meet the incumbents at price and quality. You have to be better. Because if you can say we can meet at price and quality, the incumbents will say, I can easily drop the price. I have something you don't. That's called a balance sheet. And then, when I was talking with one of the former heads of innovation at one of the energy majors, he said, not only do you need to be able to drop the price, a lot of our strategics, like a strategic like us, will go to our suppliers and saying, we have startup AY, XYZ, and they said they can do it 90%. Can you meet them? I'm not too sure many of our suppliers will say no to that. And then I think one of the things I think is another very high important thing is that our founders need to be coachable. I understand that most of the founding teams of these climate tech companies have to be technical because they have to be building a solution. And it would be great if they had someone on their founding team that had decades building big, complex projects, but that's not usually the case. And it's probably, you shouldn't expect them to have a 50-year-old project developer as a co-founder. But we need founders who are at the minimum know what is good in project development, what is bad for FOAK, And more importantly, what they don't know, and are they willing to share the reins on commercialization and scale up with someone who's not a founder? Because I think right now I'm seeing too many founders who are learning project finance and project development on the fly as they're doing it. And to me, that is a red flag because they're essentially trying to learn on what will be the hardest project that anyone can ever do. Paul has built 9 major power projects, and that allows him to do FOAK. And I kind of think like one great analogy for this is that you're learning how to ski, but the first thing you do is black diamonds. You don't try on the bunny slope. And maybe you're that remarkable athlete that one day you're doing moguls. But most people need to go from the bunny slope and then over time, get to the black diamonds.
So let me just ask a question on that. So if again, Cameron Decarb Tech is coming to trying to get David Yeh and team to, be their backers, be their support structure, be their developers. What does that mean I should already have done? If I don't have that experience, are you expecting me to come to the table and say, but I found this person, I found this woman, I found this guy who has this expertise? Or is it that are you saying we can find you that expertise?
We have precursor, like we're mission first. What we want to do is help catalyze the next generation of Teslas, which will build infrastructure, decarbonize their industry sector, and hopefully create trillion-dollar companies. And what we also we also want to meet companies where they are. We don't expect someone to have on their founding team a 30-year veteran from Bechtel or Nextera or from Chevron. And what we try to be is this embedded fractional chief FOAK officer, chief FOAK team, chief FOAK partner, where at the start, because probably your project development team may have at most one person, we can do a lot of the heavy lifting and get things done. But part of what we want to do is help you build up that DNA, build up that muscle, and help you hire the right people, help you train them up. So in the long term, what we're doing is teaching you how to fish. And you can do this on your own, and we'll move on to another project or another part of the FOAK journey that you may need us with. Because we view this FOAK journey, it's not a few months, this is many years.
So we've kind of hit there on what you're expecting from founders, that kind of coachability element. Mm-hmm. Anything else from them, or any thoughts on, you're in their shoes, what should they be looking for from their investors, from their their partners?
So I think the one thing that I'm starting to see a lot is people are trying to outsource project development since they recognize they don't have the expertise in-house, and it takes 10,000 hours to develop that expertise. And to me, like that's a fraught proposition. As a parent of young children, I kind of view this in the lens of outsourcing care of your newborn. I'm sure you can do it. Is it ideal? Probably not. Because like the key things about doing these early projects, from pilot to demo to your first few folks, is that you need to be there and learn. You're going to learn so much to do your scale up and your cost downs. Like, how do you get from being 10x the price of Portland cement to being cheaper than incumbents? You do that by building your demo and seeing what works and what doesn't work. You do that by doing your pilot and doing repeat and rinse. And like, even like, there's this one client that reached out to us, and they're one of the leading hard tech companies in climate tech. And they managed to have their first equipment sited with the customer before they actually had a major demonstration. And then they came back to me after this project was producing hydrogen, saying like, "Oh, we actually want to go find financing, to create a facility within our own headquarters, so we can learn from it, test it, and tweak it." And it was not surprising, like that they said like they wanted to work with their first operating facility, but clients was not okay with them coming over at all times of the day, turning on things, turning off things, and adding new equipment. They're like, the job of this piece of equipment is to produce hydrogen. And again, like one of the key things also is that for most of these traditional project development, there's something called design lock or design freeze. For most startups, there is not that. They're doing their FOAK while still improving their technology. And that you can't outsource development for that. You need to have your developer in-house. So I think that's one of the key things. And probably another thing is that people have also been saying that like we may not have this capability, but we have a great EPC. Mm. But with EPCs and just saying what I call the hold my beer kind of strategy is just saying the EPC will go to you say, hold my beer and they'll do everything. I think that's a recipe for having some pretty expensive EPC bills. Like I have a lot of friends in the EPC community and it pains me to say that, but there's this old adage that people say EPCs are designed to bill, not build. And you do have that principal agent.
Pretty sure some of your friends in EPCs are taking a step away from you on the Christmas card list. So we have we have that insight into what makes things work, or certainly what the kind of green flags, amber flags might be. But let's look more positively. So in the last kind of 15 months, deals have been happening. What have you been seeing that is proving the model is possible, that is proving this works? What are some of the success stories?
I think just deals are still getting done, and they're big deals. Like Heirloom's recently $150 million B, where they had major strategics like Japan Airlines, Mitsubishi, Mitsui investing along with Siemens, as well as great traditional VCs like Breakthrough and Carbon Direct and Lower Carbon, showing deals are still getting done. Infinium's recent $1.1 billion deal with Brookfield, again, another example, deals are getting done. And to me, like recessions are a great time to build businesses. It sorts out between founders who've got grit and founders who are tourists. And I was just recently thinking about some of the great businesses that got built during a recession. There's this one rideshare company called Uber. There's this one hoteling-esque company called Airbnb. There's a payment company called Square. And if you even go further back, like Microsoft was started during a recession. Charles Schwab was literally done in the heart of the market crash in the early 1970s. Even like some of the most iconic names in US business, like GM, UPS, were started in something they called the 1907 panic. And I heard that even Standard Oil, which is the father of all the US energy majors, was founded in the last year of the Civil War. So I'm optimistic that the same equivalent for FOAK and climate tech will happen in the next few years.
What do you make of the kind of current point in time, and to what extent policy shifts? Are you expecting to see a particular difference in how FOAK projects get evaluated, or I can give the view from the industrials to some extent, but I'm interested in what you see as the view from investors and from your own experience.
So I think from my experience, like the last 4 years under Biden was like almost a golden age for climate tech. There was so much capital flowing in, so many great startups getting created, lots of support from government, whether it be the LPO or the DOE's OSED, strategics getting very active. And in the next 4 years, I think it's going to be tougher. But as I said, recessions are great times to build businesses. And this is where business like startups and growth companies need to get lean and mean. They need to understand how they can go build a business that gets their FOAK done for tens of millions, not hundreds of millions. They need to understand how they can, where they find that missing middle of capital is working with strategics and finding the remaining, pockets of non-dilutive capital in the world. There still are strategics. There is still government funding. whether that be at the state level. And there's also the US is one of the world's largest markets, but FOAK is just not a US acronym. Europe is a great place to build. Asia is a great place to build. Australia is a great place to build. And maybe it's time to expand these horizons.
For what it's worth, some of the conversations we'd had last year, well before any change in policy landscape in the US, we were already hearing from industrials that there was a shift, not away from doing this at all, but from the phase of just sort of trying out any tech and seeing what happened was long over. They needed companies to come with a business model. And our most recent event in Houston kind of reiterated this, which is the industrials that are actively pursuing decarbonization or lower carbon products, they're not stopping. They're already active. They are continuing. They've already got skin in the game. They've already got money in the game. But again, they need partners. They need technology partners who come with the business model and really understand how that business model betters the industrial situation, not just plugs into the side of a plant and is fabulous, but how does it actively contribute to their fundamental marketplace? So I think there's a moment in time, it feels very different, but some of this difference, I think, was already coming out in different ways in how the industrials certainly felt about new technology.
And again, like a lot of people are saying there's a massive pullback, but there's also signs of green shoots, right? Hitachi VC just raised a $400 million fund. I have friends who are going to be seeded by one of the largest natural resources companies to go start a climate tech fund. So to me, the long arc of history, as Obama says, is upwards, right? And I still believe the long arc of climate investing and sustainability is upwards. But that doesn't mean there's not ups and downs in it. And I think, there's this great quote from the former head of the International Renewable Energy Association. And he said that the sustainable revolution is inevitable, but will happen soon enough. Mm. And I do believe it's inevitable. And what I'm trying to do at Precursor is make it happen soon enough.
Mm. Well, last question for you. I'm actually going to combine two questions, which is tell me about Precursor, but tell me how Precursor is going to help facilitate a real Tesla-style deal in this industrial decarb space, which, I mean, you can take it slightly more broadly than industrial decarb if you need to, but how do you see that unfolding? And, through that, obviously tell us a little bit more about your plans for the next couple of years.
Thank you. That is a great question. How does Precursor accelerate the Tesla effect? Precursor was created to launch the next generation of category-defining companies, the Google of energy, cement, steel, chemicals, minerals, and more. These companies offer solutions that are significantly better than the incumbents. There is no green premium. They're not only meeting the incumbents in price, quality, and sustainability, they are significantly better. This drastically better solution forces incumbents to innovate at speed and scale, like Tesla did with electrification of transportation. I was very lucky to be one of the first people to test drive the Model S. And when you first drove it, you knew that it was leaps and bounds better than a conventional car. The acceleration, the integration of IT, it was more that this EV was green. It was just a better driving experience. So how will we help? How will we make this Tesla effect happen for our clients? Tesla did not come Tesla till it acquired the shuttered Newry plant and then started manufacturing the Model S. Till then, much of the manufacturing was outsourced to the UK for Lotus to make their Roadster. But this one monumental accomplishment was based on a solid FOAK foundation that took years to build. That meant having bankable business models, infrastructure-grade financial roadmaps, de-risking the early projects and technology, which in their case was delivering the Tesla Roadster, securing innovative financing, including, in their case, the $465 million loan from the Department of Energy, It was negotiating creditworthy commercial agreements. And then most importantly, being excellent at the end-to-end project execution. And what we at Precursor hope is to be our client's chief FOAK officer, partner team for getting that FOAK checklist done and accomplished. Many members of our team have been doing this for 30 years, and we want to leverage those decades of experience to be your Sherpa to help summit your own individual FOAK mountain. So then you ask us, what are our plans? For us, the next few years, our plans to be laser focused on our stated mission, which is to be the partner for the next generation of founders building landmark companies and infrastructure that will innovate and decarbonize industry and create trillion-dollar companies. We want to partner and help with all the best founders, and that means the ones who are the most talented and have giga-scale ambitions. So we want to work with the next Sergey and Larrys who are founding their own Google, whether it be for steel, cement, chemicals, batteries, or minerals. And this journey is measured in many years. And we plan to be with these startups each step of the way, from demo to early projects to mass deployment. And that's how we plan to spend the next few years.
And does that concept of a Tesla for decarbonization, do you think that company exists? Is it already maybe even one that you've mentioned, or do you think we've yet to see that right combination of technology, market, and finance launch that company or scale that company?
I think you have to look at the history of Tesla. I think Tesla is over a 20-year company. And right now, there's a lot of great companies out there that are, I would say, on a similar growth arc that Tesla was in its early years, whether that be companies like Fervo that we talked about, Infinium that we talked about, or Solugen that's doing green chemicals, or Boston Metal, which is trying to green steel. These are a lot of the next generation companies. And then I kind of think about a lot of my own companies that we work with clients. One I think about is Blue Whale Materials. Can they be the Tesla of batteries recycling? And we believe in them.
Well, David, I'm really so excited to see where Precursor takes you, because I think as you've described that team, it's a really fascinating combination of experiences and capabilities. I think, I'm not surprised you've had this wave of outreach since launching just, what was it, 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago from the day?
We launched on the 13th, and we've had about 100 companies kind of reach out to us. I just haven't, I need to do a better job of logging them all into our CRM.
Well, good luck with the new platform. Looking forward to hearing about it.
And thank you for having us. It's been always a pleasure speaking with Alex, and hopefully we can find ways to work together in the future. And what you're doing is great for the climate community.
Thank you.
At Jano Media, we recognise that great content has the power to create impactful and positive change for lives and society. Whether that's video, live streams, photography or podcasts, partnering with us will enable you to harness the power of content to engage, inform, and inspire. Reach out to us today.